How many times she says,
I'm not counting.
oh, you went already?
We have to move around. There's 15 people here.
We're gonna put Athena on
Dolly.
a.
If you do that slow enough, you could maybe do this with 4 people, Kelsey, by just
Moving them.
moving people and change clothes.
Yeah, but we can be quiet, Craig.
Okay, we got, she's got,
Craig.
Have you ever thought about anything pertaining to South Africa? The struggle that they went through for years, the freedom that they gained, anything? Well, if not, I'm going to tell you about it. So first off, I'm going to summarize the rule, how apartheid came to be. Apartheid literally means separateness. In 1948, the Nationalist Party gained power. Right away, they began to implement apartheid laws. These laws affected almost everybody in South Africa until the ANC gained power in 1994. My interest in this subject was actually sparked by my professor, Dr. Curry, when I took her class, and then again when I went to South Africa with her and 4 other students. Since then, I've kind of been weirdly obsessed with it. So, first we're going to talk about the beginning of the apartheid, the laws that were implemented. Then we're going to talk about the middle of the apartheid, the violence, the protests. And then finally we're going to talk about the freedom that they gained. So first off, let's talk about the laws that were implemented. In 1949, the prohibition of mixed marriages laws was implemented. This law made it illegal for non-whites and whites to marry. The government wanted to keep the racial purity of every race. When I was in South Africa, I actually met a man named Al, who was married to a white woman throughout the apartheid. They've been married for years now. But for about 20 years, they had to live in separate places, and we'll get to why soon. The next law that was implemented was the Population Registration Act of 1950. This meant that people now had to declare their race at birth. If there was any question whether a person was black or colored, there was 2 tests that were given. The pencil test, where they stuck a pencil in the person's hair and made them bend down and try to shake it out. If it shook out, they were colored. If it did not, they were considered black. The fingernail test, they'd look at the fingernails, and if they were dirty, it meant that the person was a laborer, so they were considered black, because those were the only jobs that blacks could get at that time. In 1950, the Group Areas Act was also implemented. This divided up the residential areas. Each race had a specific area that they were allowed to live in, and that was then subdivided into cultures. This is why Al and his wife were never able to live together during apartheid rule. The next was implemented in 1952, the Native Laws Amendment. This restricted the movements of Africans. Both men and women were forced to carry passes that contained their name, their birth date, their employment, where they lived, and it had to be signed off by their bosses. If a police officer caught them on the street without a pass, they would be arrested. And in 1953, the Bantu Education Act was enforced. This meant the government took control of all education in South Africa. It was very detrimental to the African population. The government felt that blacks did not need to know math or reading or anything that pertained to actual knowledge. They felt that they only needed enough to get a job as a laborer. Because of these laws, a lot of unrest began to spread throughout the country. And security forces were deployed into townships. In 1960, which was the date of the Sharpeville Massacre, it was a protest against the pass books that people were forced to carry. People were peacefully marching towards government buildings. Instead, the police opened fire on the crowd. 69 Africans were killed, hundreds were injured, only 2 whites were killed. The Africans that were killed were shot in the back while they were trying to flee the police. The ANC, the African National Congress, was then exiled. Members were arrested. They were no longer to operate out in the open. So Nelson Mandela called for armed resistance. Years went by and then the Soweto uprising happened. Students began protesting the Bantu Education Act. The peaceful protest that marched through several townships turned violent. Beer halls were burnt down, schools were burnt down. Police again opened fire on the crowd and then threw tear gas. This was actually the beginning of the end of the apartheid. South Africa became ungovernable. So Prime Minister Botha stepped down and F.W. de Klerk took his place. De Klerk knew that the country could not continue running like this, and so he began negotiating with Nelson Mandela, who was still in prison. Mandela wanted him to release political prisoners, and so he did. He also started demolishing the apartheid laws. In February of 1990, the nation gained their hero back. Nelson Mandela was released from prison. He became interim president until 1994. In 1994, all South Africans were able to vote. The ANC gained power and Nelson Mandela became president of the country. A country now known as a rainbow nation. South Africans struggled for years to gain their freedom. The ANC proved to be a valuable asset while struggling. Through the brutality of the police, the laws, they somehow managed to gain their freedom for themselves.